Okay, good evening. It is 5 o'clock on March 9th, or actually 5:02, and I'm calling our Council Planning and Development Committee meeting to order. I am the chair, Jessica Cohen, and I am joined by two members of the committee, Council President Tony Kuda and Council Member Craig Cobb. We're also joined with Councilman Posh, Mayor Petrus, and Director Zamt, and Assistant Director Karen Knittel. So thank you all for joining us. And on Zoom, we have Councilwoman Stone and guests, resident guests. So we have a short agenda today, but a lot of material. So before we get started, just a process note for everyone, and I shared this with council, but Councilwoman Stone is now chairing the Housing Committee, and we have 6 one-hour slots over 2 Mondays for 7 committees. So with the help of the Planning Department, we're going to be shifting this committee meeting to the 4th Tuesday of every month starting in April, and we've cleared that with everyone. So just a process note on that, and then the Housing Committee will be at 6 p.m. on the first alternating second Monday of the month. So with that, we are going to get a full update on accessory dwelling units because the Planning Department has been doing quite a bit of work on this.
Thank you. So first I want to say that Xavier, our great planner, is out of town, or he would be here giving this presentation because he's done a lot of heavy lifting on this project with Eric and myself. So I just wanted to be sure to mention that. So we are going to, let me see if I can give you just a brief background on the research that was done on the ADUs, community engagement that's been undertaken. We want to talk about some of the community engagement takeaways that we heard and implemented, some zoning adjustments that were made based on some of that community engagement that took place, and then the proposed zoning. So the formal process of a zoning review has not yet begun. This has all just been preliminary work before there's any legislation introducing zoning code amendments. So just to let you know, we're at the very first stages of talking about should there be legislation amending the zoning to look at having accessory dwelling units. So for some background, we did do, in July of 2004, we worked with Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, and for probably about a year, they did research nationally on best practices around ADUs and how they're implemented, rules and regulations that are used to regulate them, as well as whether or not they're a good idea for communities. And the big takeaway they found is that they can have positive benefits. Obviously, you need to make sure that the regulations fit your community. But some of the big takeaways were that it often allows people to age in place. It allows affordable housing in your neighborhood. It can be a wealth builder if it's somebody who has a home and needs a little bit of extra income and they're living on the property, they could have that ADU if that's permitted. And then it's sustainable and also land conservation benefits to it. Then in December of 2024, you'll remember we did an accessory dwelling unit design competition, and this was with help through the AARP. And it was a great way to introduce the concept of what an ADU is, a smaller dwelling unit on a property where there's already a dwelling unit where somebody could live. And so there were 5 winners, people who took typical lots in Cleveland Heights, looked at how you could design an ADU and fit them on these typical lots. And of course, that was before any zoning regulations. So we made some assumptions. So some of them may, need to be tweaked if they move forward. It was a great way to start the conversation within our community. And then in July of 2025, we worked with Kronberger Urbanists and Architects, who looked at our code, and also they're a nationally known firm, and they're familiar with ADUs, and so they looked at how ADUs are implemented, and they found that across the country, ADUs often help with that missing middle, that affordable housing that's sometimes not available in all of our neighborhoods, and that it often helped people age in place. So here we are in August of 2025. We drafted like a first draft of the zoning changes. This is still pre any formal process. And then this past year, mainly Xavier, but also Brooke Seekers, both of them went out and did some community engagements. So we did do an ADU zoning survey, and there were 645 responses. We held 9 pop-up tabling sessions, so they went out to different locations within the city, and they spoke with 210 people. And then some of those people also then went back and filled out the online survey, we'd had 3 educational videos on social media, and there was over 25,700 views of those educational videos. There was an article in the Heights Observer. Future Heights crowdsourcing had a conversation around ADUs, and there were 40 attendees there. And then there was an outcome report, which I believe everybody got a copy of on this committee to review before today.
Just to add, I sent that out to all council members.
Okay, good.
And actually, Mayor Petros, now I'm wondering, do you have it? Because I presume you have it, but
I can't remember, to be
Okay.
honest.
We'll make sure that he and Mr. Reese get a copy.
Okay.
So some of the community takeaways was that there's a need to have continued education about ADUs, because no matter how many times you talk about something, until it catches your attention, sometimes you don't hear it. ADU zoning should adjust to the size of the property. We know in Cleveland Heights we have just about every size property you can think of, from very small to very large properties. There's concerns about ADUs becoming Airbnbs and out-of-state land sales. And that's something we can talk about, and also our regulations can help address. The survey respondents tended to be single-family homeowners, and the average respondent was somewhat interested in constructing an ADU. So these are just a couple examples of what people wrote. I can read them to you. There should be categories of ADU with specification based on the size of the lot. For a larger lot, the ADU size can be larger and doesn't need to replace the garage. This person personally felt that ADUs are not a bad thing as long as they are proportionate to the lot size, and for smaller lots, replace or add the existing garage. The second example was that the need for additional affordable housing for family units and the ability to expand in place offer for far more community value than any aesthetic limitations. Aesthetic rules should err more permissive than restrictive, but uses, for example, rental or Airbnb, should be more restricted. Encourage families, not more rent extortion by folks outside the community, was that person's sentiment. So some of the zoning adjustments based on what we heard through the surveys and that community engagement was, initially we were thinking a 3-foot setback, because that's typically what our garages are set back. And the suggestion from the public was really you need that 5-foot setback. In our single family zoning district, that's the required side yard currently for a house. So that's similar to what a house would be. The maximum size should be 1,000 square feet. They said it should be 800 square feet for properties that are less than 600 square feet. And then for properties that are over 6,000, it could be 1,000 square feet for the dwelling units, for the ADU dwelling units. And they're talking about that would be maximum, so it could be smaller than that, just not bigger than that. And then, of course, we added to make sure that it was clear that the ADU must be smaller than the primary house. So the house should be the primary structure on your parcel, and this could be an accessory, because that's the term, accessory dwelling unit. It should be accessory. And the other one is that Airbnb should be regulated, and that's being considered and talked about under other regulations. So we didn't want that to get dropped or people think we were ignoring it. So proposed zoning, and you got the red line version of this. I'm just going to review this a little bit. The main section of this is in section 1121.13, which has the regulations specific to accessory dwelling units, and there's 4 categories under that. The first is location and place. So they would be allowed or permitted in AA, A, and B districts. They could be attached or detached from the principal dwelling on the same lot. So on the house, it could either be attached or detached. There can only be 1 ADU on a lot. Only on lots with single family or 2-family principal buildings. We know we have a lot of non-conforming buildings, and so even in our zoning districts, we can have different uses on those parcels. So we wanted to make sure this was restricted to residential properties. And rear and side yards only is where they would be allowed. They would be prohibited from being in a front yard. And then under size, height, and yard regulations, the maximum square footage again would be 800 square feet on lots less than 6,000 square feet in area. And remember, our code says that a standard or normal single family property has 7,500 square feet. Now we know we've got many parcels in our city that are smaller than that. They're called non-conforming parcels, and they are legitimately allowed to have the single family house, but they would be smaller than that. And then if you had a parcel that was 6,000 square feet or larger, then it would be allowed to have 1,000. The maximum square footage of the ADU would be 1,000 square feet.
So again, these are accessory to the principal house or dwelling. Private parking area does not contribute to the ADU. So if you build an ADU with a garage, we wouldn't count that garage car space as part of your ADA 800 square foot, for example. It would be 800 square foot for the living space, and then whatever your garage space would be counted separately. And single family, the square footage of an ADU may not exceed the size of the principal dwelling. So if you happen to be on a parcel that has small principal house, then your ADU would have to be smaller than that principal house. Okay. So ADUs shall not exceed 24 feet in height or 2 stories. The minimum yard distance for an attached ADU shall be the same as the principal dwelling, so we couldn't be closer, for example, to the side yard than the principal dwelling currently is. Detached ADUs shall maintain a 5-foot side and rear yard setback. ADUs on the corner lot shall be no closer to the secondary frontage than the principal dwelling, unless it's specifically permitted elsewhere in the code. You'll recall last year, maybe 2 years ago, we changed the way we talked about corner properties. So there's the main street is considered the primary frontage, and then that side street is considered your secondary frontage. So you really have 2 front yards. And then properties with an ADU are permitted an additional 200 square feet of parking garage area in addition to the maximum floor space that the code calls out for private parking garages, with a maximum limit of parking garage space of 1,300 square feet. So we were trying to make sure that you could accommodate an additional space for a car if you wanted a garage, but still make sure that we didn't end up with parcels with gigantic garages and nothing else. So under design standards, there's just a few. The ADU shall be designed to maintain or complement the architectural style and character of the principal dwelling. The exterior materials, roof pitch, and window proportions of the ADU shall be compatible with those of the principal dwelling. And ADUs shall have exterior entrances separate from those of the principal dwelling and or other units that should be clearly defined and complementary to the architectural feature or styles. And all exterior doors shall face the interior of the property or the public right-of-way. We wanted to be sure you didn't put an ADU in your backyard and then the main door is to your side yard in your neighbor's property, or in your rear of the house to your neighbor behind it. So it would have to face your interior lot or the street. And then going on to use and occupancy, there would be an owner occupancy requirement. The property owner shall occupy either the principal dwelling or the ADU as their primary residence. And that home occupations, a home-based business may operate within the ADU, subject to the regulations that we already have about home-based businesses that are in section 1165.02B. So those are really the core of the standards for an ADU. And you have the red line version, so but we can go through those again. I think that was pretty much it. Sorry. Let me see if I can get out of this now.
Sure.
So I thought I heard 2 different things, but maybe I'm mistaken. I thought I heard that one of the advantages of an ADU is that you can use it for rental property and make, like supplemental income. And then did I just hear you say that it's for owner occupants only?
So what we're saying is that on that lot, there's a principal building and an ADU. The owner needs to live in one of those 2 units.
Oh, one of the, I
So
missed that.
we know that there's some people living in neighborhoods that they would want to stay in, but they want to downsize.
Yeah.
At the same time, they have children, some of them, who would love to have the main house and they want to build an ADU so that they can move into that smaller unit. Or perhaps they want to move into the smaller unit and they would rent out the larger home to a family.
I see.
And just to add, many communities don't have that requirement, but when we going through all the research and then thinking about Cleveland Heights, we felt like that was important.
And I think, in our discussions about this, the other benefit to that is you would think that if the owner of the property has the main house, and even if they are renting out to a non-family member, the ADU, or vice versa, that tenant would be more
on their best
reasonable.
behavior.
Yeah, on their
Yeah.
best behavior, correct, because the tenant, the landlord is, essentially on the property. Well, let me ask, that was where I was going next. We all received the community engagement survey results as well as the draft ordinance. Were there any big picture or clarifying questions that anyone has, and I have a few if you wanna think about it, I can get us started.
I have a question.
Sure.
If I might. I just wonder if you could, thinking that we're dealing with the zoning regulations, whether you envision any interlocking changes in the housing or building codes that would follow from this legislation?
So, yeah, we would have to cross-reference it just to make sure there were no inadvertent conflicts, because we don't wanna permit something in the zoning code that perhaps the building code would not permit, but I don't think there are any, but we would double check again.
Yeah, we've had preliminary discussions with our building department folks, but obviously need
Yeah.
to make sure.
I mean, I would presume that because you would be in a landlord-tenant situation, that those regulations would be referenced and apply here. Is that correct?
Well, it'd be like any property. The zoning code doesn't dictate what happens with a property, but you would have to follow all the rules and regulations. So any rental requirements you would have to follow if you were renting it.
And just a word on so I'm the chair of the housing committee, just a word on the Airbnb piece. There is a currently legislation, Senate Bill 109, that is purported to be able to do away with regulation of Airbnbs in cities. This is the second time the Ohio legislators picked it up. Fortunately, in this legislation, there is a grandfather clause for any municipality that has an Airbnb statute on their books. We don't yet. Shaker Heights just reenacted theirs to make sure they are grandfathered, so that's going to be a priority of our committee. So making this statute part of your zoning, making these once again interlock is going to be important. So I look forward to working with you on that.
Well, I just have one follow-up question on that. So in terms of like rental inspections, how are you envisioning like an ADU? Like, is it whichever property, the accessory or the principal dwelling unit is the one that falls under rental inspections versus residential owner occupied inspections for housing? Or have we not gotten that far in the?
I don't think we've gone that far, but I would think that you could almost treat this like a two-family. It's been separated, so really both properties would be examined, let me put it that way, not necessarily inspected, but examined.
Okay, but we do have, correct me if I'm wrong, I had thought we have two separate exterior inspection processes, one for rentals and one for owner occupied. Is that not the case?
So there is a rental registration,
Okay,
and there's inspections that are associated with that,
okay,
but every home, every residential property goes through a systematic inspection every 5 years.
okay.
Whether
Well,
it's-
one's 3 and one's 5.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying that it would fall under the 5 presumably, because it's more.
I think it's the other way around.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah,
If you have a rental property, it's a rental property.
Okay, that's what I was trying to tease out. I had no preconceived preferences, I just was curious. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. To clarify something, you said on the square footage limits, are those only for when the ADU is in an accessory building and not part of the primary?
No, that would be the maximum size for the ADU, whether it was detached or attached.
So if you have, say, a 5,500 square foot lot and you have a 2,500 square foot house, you could still only build an 800 square foot ADU.
It would depend on your parcel size, so if your parcel size was greater than 6,000 square feet, you would be allowed to have a 1,000
Right,
square foot ADU.
but if it's less than that, even if the ADU is part of the primary structure, it can only go up to 800.
And part of that is our attempt not to create two families. The intent here is really to build an accessory dwelling unit, not allow people to just, create a
Split
second,
into
yeah.
a duplex essentially.
Questions. So the housing study that we're currently doing, when do we anticipate that that's gonna be finished?
That should be finished around September.
And do we know that there is in fact a housing shortage in Cleveland Heights?
The preliminary analysis is showing that there are definite needs. Remember, it's a housing needs assessment, so there are definitely needs out there for more housing, more types of housing. And ADUs are gonna be part of the recommendation anyway.
And so I understand that to have an accessory dwelling unit on your own property may enhance your value. But what about the adjacent properties? Are their values going to be diminished by having another structure potentially 5 or 6 feet within the property line, potentially taking up what would otherwise be permeable grass space with the implications from runoff and all of that? What considerations have we given to that?
We've given considerations and we can dig these things out. So there is a lot of data out there about how ADUs actually increase property values in the neighborhood. And we'll pull those out and give that to you know on a plate. And to your point of the impervious surfaces, Karen can speak to.
So there is a maximum coverage for the lot that we would look at. And you're concerned about stormwater, you're never allowed to build and have water from your property thrown onto your neighbor property. So that would all be taken care of during the regular building permitting process and the design review by the architects. So I don't know if was there something more you wanted me to say, sorry.
Oh, I think you said that there's a coverage requirement.
There's a maximum coverage for each parcel, so.
And that was 60%?
Correct.
But that is, don't we have a 70%?
This is part of the change to, if you'll see, the
red
coverages
line.
are currently confusing because it's by yard. So this
Right.
creates a more overall approach. So decreasing the amount overall actually may be a result of these changes.
Are there in existence any models showing us potentially what, in a 3D form, what an accessory dwelling unit would look like on a typical, lot size and our various neighborhoods?
So I think we should send the county,
Yes.
because the planning commission had the benefit of seeing the county planning commission's presentation on ADUs, and they did a study just of Cleveland Heights, and they have a lot of visuals in there. So I don't know if you have more than that, but that certainly we should send around.
So we will have more because the design competition winners are now working on plans for the ABR to review. And the ABR, I think rightfully so, said, well, we can't just do this in a theoretical world. So there's 5 or 6 different properties that they're looking at. So we can provide all that information.
And I think it is important that if we're going forward with this, that we do more to communicate to the residents the potential changes from this. Because I had some people that when they took the survey, they felt some of the questions were drafted to elicit a favorable response as opposed to actually feeling that they were being surveyed whether they were in favor of them or not. Did you ever get any complaints like that, or was
We
it
got plenty of complaints
just
like
me?
that. And just for the record, it was a survey, it wasn't a preference survey. Are you yay or nay for this? We were trying to get as much input about how to improve the proposal before we ever brought it up for council. So it was designed not to have a section that says, are you in favor of ADUs or not? Because that wasn't the intent of the survey.
And do we have any timeline where you would like council to be voting on this?
We don't have a timeline, as we discussed at the last P and D meeting. We wanted to see if you were okay with us introducing this on its own timeline as opposed to tying it in with the overall zoning update. And so we were thinking of bringing this forward in April likely, but we can do some more thinking about, if there needs to be some more upfront engagement first before it comes before you guys.
My preference would be for some more upfront engagement, some examples that the county has, and that we hold, maybe a town hall at our community center after we have advertised the heck out of this.
Or a public hearing, town hall, same thing. And a public hearing is just process-wise, it would be required further on because this is a zoning code change as opposed to just a regular ordinance. But I think some of the feedback that we being from the planning commission perspective, that we've traditionally gotten is by the time it's gotten to the public hearing part of that process, it's already way far down. So maybe having a public I think that's a great idea to have a public hearing earlier to say this is the draft, this isn't the one that is now ping-ponging between, the approval bodies.
So I wanna go back to Sarah's reference to the state's legislation where once again they looking to infringe on home rule. You know, there's legislation out there that has been passed by other cities that doesn't really reference, I mean, and this is about short-term rentals, but it doesn't really reference the short-term rentals. It just says, 30 days, that's it, So it's, I don't know if that's technically, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but maybe not in that area. But we need to figure that business out sooner than later. I'm with Sarah on that because I know that's not where where we left off with the legislation, like 2 years ago or whatever it was. But we need, in lieu of this, where do we want to be on this? I know there were even some, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but there were even questions about the number of days and so forth that were, kind of unresolved, and fees and so forth. So there's a little bit of work to do on that. I know, Sarah, you're all over this, but I'm a little concerned by what they're going to consider grandfathering.
The grandfathering portion would be if any, as I understand it, that any municipality that has enacted legislation to control Airbnbs prior to the Senate bill being enacted, those statutes will stand. But once the Senate passes the bill, it will prevent other cities from creating that legislation. And just for perspective, this bill was introduced a year ago. It's been sitting in committee for a year, so it hasn't had a lot of action recently. But this is a great opportunity to be able to support, the development of ADUs and also solve a problem, because I read the committee or the public comment in the survey and people are really concerned about it. So hopefully we can address that issue and it would cover both the ADUs and other, Airbnbs as well. One of the things I wanted to mention also, and this kind of aligns with it, when I read the ADU study, and there were sample cities that were Cincinnati and several cities in Minnesota, each of those cities had a sort of basic registration policy for ADUs so that the city could keep tabs on where they were. I didn't see that in your zoning registration. I don't know if that would come under housing or not, but I just wonder if that's on your radar screen at all to be able to keep that data and knowledge about ADUs and so on. So I just offer that as a question.
So Sarah, so one of the things we talked about with short-term rentals was a separate registration. So I think it would be at least appropriate to have that conversation about ADUs because
Okay, thank you.
I can tell you just from my 4 years, there's a lot of concern about short-term rentals, and in as much as this could be, some overlap there, we need to address it.
The other issue that I raised when we were talking about this in planning for this meeting was our nuisance ordinance and thinking about if there is some, and again, no preconceived ideas, but perhaps there needs to be particular component just for ADUs. So it's something that I think, holistically we should look at, because I can imagine as a neighbor.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And there is a section of the short-term rental legislation that's
Really.
that has a section on nuisance and a very step-by-step kind of methodical, here's what happens if and when.
Right, and that's really, that was my question actually, like maybe it's not the nuisance parameters, maybe it's violations or enforcement. Does that look different for an ADU versus owner occupied? I'm just gonna take chair's prerogative for a second and ask my question on this. So in the draft ordinance, there's a maximum number of accessory buildings of 2 detached accessory buildings, and then there's a maximum number of ADUs, which is 1, but it says maximum accessory building or structure, and then there's a whole list, which I can find, which includes a shed and things. So I just wanna make sure that we're obviously consistent in the code, but are we saying, and a garage, I think, is an accessory structure, building. So building or structure, so can you just tease apart for me how those maximums play
Right,
out?
so building, would have a foundation and it's people use, so the garage or an ADU. Some people have already a swimming pool, like a pool house.
Okay.
So there's a max, and the codes all currently says you have a maximum of 2 accessory buildings. So that's what the code's saying. Now structures, again, that you look at, we consider fences structures. We consider front porches to be a structure on the house. So the structures are kind of a separate accessory to something. It's
Well-
not.
What would you consider a shed? Is that considered a building or a structure?
I think it's structured.
We call it a structure, and the building code treats it that way too, unless they get to a certain square footage, then they require some additional permitting and building review.
And I know this is getting a tiny bit in the weeds, but I do think that the definition is accessory building or structure. And I think given that we're maximum or not, I read this, I thought 2 maximum accessory buildings or structures. That means you could have a garage, ADU, no shed, or no garage. So I just wanna point that out to look
But to make sure it's
at
clear.
that. And I wanted to make sure that if you do have an ADU and a garage, you can have a shed, you can have a porch, and make sure that that's clear that you're not having to take away from your property to add an ADU. Okay, we've been talking about this for about a half an hour, which is about our time. What I've heard, just to consolidate the feedback we've heard around the table is, one, if you're looking through the zoning code ordinance and you have details or specific red lines that you wanna pass along, I guess feel free to, how would we like to run that? Would you want that to come directly to you? Would you like that to come to me and I can pass it along?
You should come to planning@clevelandheights.gov.
Okay.
And sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
All of this draft is up on our website, so it's part of what Councilman Kopp's talking about. I think we'll advertise that this information is all out there in advance of holding whatever public engagement.
Right, so that was gonna be my second point. So first point, if anybody has any detailed things that they wanna add, or questions about the draft, send that to planning@clevelandheights.gov. The planning staff will look into timing for a public hearing on this, and it sounds like we're looking at that as kind of a kickoff of, even though we've done a lot of work in the community over the last couple years, but a kickoff at least that this process has begun, that there is potential legislation. And then my sense would be, and I'm open to input, that following the public hearing, we would either bring it to committee of the whole or another planning and development committee meeting to decide potential timeline for legislation, or not at all, if the feedback is that.
So in terms of public hearing, we're going to hold some sort of open meeting, town hall, not a public hearing for a proposed draft proposal
We shouldn't call
as
it a
an
public
initial,
hearing.
right,
Right,
it's
we
not
should-
a, it's
right,
not a
we're not a
public hearing,
public
right?
hearing, right.
This is going to be a meeting where the public is invited.
To
and
present,
discuss.
right, and I would envision, what I'm hearing is that staff should be presenting and we should be listening and allow the public to speak, right, in some sort of forum to provide feedback. Director Zamp, do you?
Or we could do it in a true open house format where you do get to have one-on-one interactions, which we have found to be much more productive.
I mean, like the park?
Yeah,
Yes,
or open house with displays and people are interacting,
because often what
asking
happens is that
questions.
there's a few people who get up and speak and everybody else is either shy or they don't get an opportunity and then they leave the meeting with more questions than they
Have we done an ADU open house, something like that?
We've had these pop-ups.
Yeah,
So
sort
they're
of a-
smaller scale events, but we haven't done the big one because we were waiting for the new administration.
and then that would precede any introduction of legislation with an actual public hearing as part of a zoning, okay. So I can change my-
I mean, does that open house idea resonate? Or what were you thinking?
Well, I envision a presentation and then the public asking questions and a dialogue going back and forth. And then if there's a need for a breakout session or offer breakout sessions where people can speak to someone one-on-one. That way, I think that, all of the public questions and concerns are addressed in the first part of the meeting. And then if people are reluctant or shy about speaking publicly, then they can come up afterwards and have a private conversation or semi-private.
And that can be productive because once other people hear some of the dialogue, maybe that takes care of, what their concerns are, and then the ones that don't, But you don't get that redundant, people walking up in stations, asking the same questions over and over again. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's a hybrid opportunity to have an initial presentation and questions from the public, and then have open time with examples of ADUs and opportunity to okay. All right, seems we have a path forward there. I will just say as a closing note, I do think that this should run separately from the overall zoning code update, just because it is so specific and there's so much.
We've done a lot of work.
Yes, a lot of work already, and it's kind of ready to start moving, even slowly. So that's I'm not hearing any objections. So we'll move forward in that way.
And so much of the zoning code is just so standard.
Obscure? No.
Well, that, esoteric,
yeah.
but this is like everybody's,
Yes,
who wants to be-
interested, sure.
yeah, I would
sure.
say there's interest.
Absolutely.
You don't usually get 600 and some responses.
That's pretty good. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to,
Stop sharing my screen, right?
yes. And we wanted to spend some time just getting an update on the zoning code review, so back to Karen.
Oh,
Back to me? I
Oh,
thought
you
that,
didn't have a presentation for, that's fine, because,
no, I thought you were doing, sorry.
yeah, we can
We
just
can,
speak
we can
about
do
it.
it together, it's fine.
Yeah, come sit down, Karen. So we
Or
have been,
comes to the table too.
we've been meeting regularly with our team zone code. They've done a lot of work upfront, looking at our existing zoning code. They've got some thoughts about that already. And the next major step was we are creating a technical advisory group. So that'd be a group of stakeholders, our residents, and others, about 10 to 12 people that are going to be meeting with the consultant team and ourselves to primarily talk about hot topics. Number one, what are the things that are out there, generally speaking, in the zoning world, but also specific to Cleveland Heights, bringing some of their shared expertise and perspective on zoning, and then thinking about what is the engagement. What should that look like for zoning? Because again, zoning is esoteric, technical. It's a hard thing to really engage people on because it can be overwhelming, and the vast majority of it is too technical for the average person to have to worry about, if that makes sense. So we want to work with a group of people who can help us formulate that.
I don't mean, when I say who are these people, I mean like, not their names, but like,
So for example, the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. We'd like to have, somebody from the banking world, so that if we're making a decision about
I see.
different typologies, realtor, a couple of residents, we wanna make sure there's some residents, a developer, trying to get all those folks.
We were trying to think of different perspectives that would understand the zoning code and could help us inform it, because the last thing we wanna do is craft a great zoning code change and then have somebody from the real estate industry say, wait, what are you doing? We will never be able to sell property in Cleveland Heights again. So we wanna hear, and that's a crazy statement, I know, but
I hear
but
you.
we just wanna be sure we have the different perspectives to help us really craft something for the future, because that's what the zoning code is for as we continue to develop into the future.
So the idea is, once we identify those folks, we're gonna reach out to them and try to schedule a meeting in April. That would follow pretty quickly by a first public meeting on all of this. And we're trying to have that happen in that, if you remember from last time, in that diagnose stage. So that's really where the background research has been done, and now they're trying to engage with the public, identify what those hot topics are, and start to think about what some of the solutions might be. And then at the end of all that will be a report of that first, really it's the second phase. That's when it comes back to this committee and having that first conversation that we spoke about last time. Hey, here are the things that the staff and the consultant and the community have identified. Council, are you on board with that? Are there any of these things that you want to move up, move back, or not deal with at all? So we can, really be on the same path. And then after that, they get into the sort of solution stage. which starts to come up with recommendations and some drafting of language, but not yet in a formal format. And at that stage, there will also be another advisory group meeting, there'll be another open house and another interaction with you all. And then we get into a drafting stage and getting that out before the public, before it's ever introduced as legislation in its fullest format, and engaging folks on that. So a lot of moving pieces, and certainly offer it to this group, but any of your colleagues and anybody who's watching, if there's something that you think we should be addressing in the zoning, now's the time to speak up, because like I said, our team is really looking at the whole code. So if it's nonconformities or how short-term rentals are defined in the zoning code, these are all things that we're looking at now. And if there's anything else that people can think of, please feed that to us.
Yeah, and I the planning staff has been great because we have had things come up over the last year or two that haven't made it into the planning commission's annual review of the code that, is going to be part of this process.
I just want to add one thing, because I know this came up through a question from Councilman DeWitt Foy. So the county did a lot of work on transit-oriented development zoning, TOD zoning. We were actually on an unofficial advisory committee for their work, and so that certainly is going to be a part of this, is looking at the work that they did and then applying it where appropriate in Cleveland Heights.
And would you imagine that would come through Cuyahoga County Planning Commission?
That'll come through our work.
Okay.
But that'll be informed by their.
Not necessarily a representative on TAG that's going to be bringing that perspective. You all have been involved in that.
Yeah, but that's part of the reason why we want them on there as well, because they will be able to bring that perspective.
Right. And then would it make sense to have someone from RTA there as well, or do you think you'll be able to get that perspective, from
I
your
think
previous
they're on our
experience?
list.
Okay.
They were on our list, yes.
India Birdsong Terry lives
Yes.
here in Cleveland Heights and she's on our CIC.
We saw her this morning at Stone Oven.
I did not know until the last CIC meeting that she lived in Cleveland
Oh, yeah,
Heights, so that
that's
was lovely.
And then
Yeah, go ahead.
is there council participation in that, or is it meant to be a separate body specifically?
There isn't council participation in the TAG group. There could be. We tend to not have council participate because ultimately you're the decision makers. Sometimes it's better for those people to be able to speak independently, but we wouldn't be opposed to it, I'll put it that way.
I think my preference would be, and I know we're all still getting our sea legs here as a council and administration, but I think my preference would be like periodic updates that are sent to council just to let us know what has happened and concerns that are brought up or positive developments. I think that would be sufficient to give them the space to discuss while also keeping us looped in if there's anything we want to add.
And I think particularly when we identify those areas that we're focusing in on, giving you an update as to these are the ones that seem to be filtering out, will be good for you to know, should you get an inquiry from somebody in the community. But also if it doesn't reflect something you're hearing from folks, you can let us know.
City Administrator.
Yeah, I just wanted to pose, given you said there's gonna be a public meeting on the zoning code, how you might time that with the accessory dwelling unit public meeting. You see one happening in April and one in May, or I just wanted to pose that whether that's
Yeah,
something.
I think given what we spoke about earlier, the ADU public meeting will probably be a little bit different than this meeting, but we'll work at that schedule. But it's a good point that we don't want those two to overlap too much.
And do you think that we'll have the zone code diagnostic report for our May Planning and Development Committee meeting to review? It'll be the end of May now,
I
so,
think that's correct.
okay.
So we have a schedule that we need to finalize with them, but we can share that and you can see all the touch points going forward.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, and so to the extent that we have a sense of the schedule. I wanted to so the other thing is we should remind anyone who's listening about the 19th, this month, March 19th, we're talking about April and May, but March 19th we have at 6:30 p.m. we have the Blanche Avenue Extension
listening session.
listening session for what we were calling that.
So council and the administration, the mayor and the council president, be hosting a meeting in council chambers at 6:30 PM on the 19th to hear a short presentation from us and from prospective developer for infill housing, and then to pretty much hear from the public about their thoughts about the project.
And the other thing I wanted to is another update from planning and development. I have been speaking with Maisie Adams, who's the chair. Adams is her last name, correct? Yes, the chair of the Landmark Commission. And I know I shared this with I think some of you over email, but 2 years ago, the administration and the planning department completed a first draft of an ordinance to update the Landmark Commission's part of the code. The Landmark Commission is very eager to have this move along since it's been essentially sitting since 2024. And so we've laid out a timeline for that. We're hoping that by next, I believe the next meeting, we'll have the Landmark Commission here to present on that in the Planning and Development Committee meeting, what those changes are, what they're looking to do. I will say that I've read through it, doesn't seem to be, this is more of like an update as opposed to a wholesale redoing of our Landmark Commission, but it's been woefully outdated for many years. And so I've heard from Maisie that May is Preservation Month of some type. And so if we can, we're trying to move towards passing this in May in celebration of Preservation Month. So that is on the docket as well for us. And then we're continuing, the administration is continuing to work with NABA and the Taylor Road Merchants Association, moving that along.
It's gonna be at the end of April.
If pending, administration, pending agreement and my understanding.
Yeah, regarding NAVA, my understanding is that it's prepared for signing.
Yeah.
And it hasn't reached my desk yet. Usually I'm the last person to sign an agreement. But I would imagine that it's being circulated now. But regarding Taylor, I think that there was a meeting today where staff were able to talk with Myra Orenstein and learn more about the budget that she drafted.
So I think we're moving in that direction, but we'll get updates and we can adjust accordingly if we need to. And we have draft legislation on the changes to how parks are approved, substantial changes to parks are approved or disapproved. And when I say we have legislation, I mean we have a draft, a first draft. The planning department is looking at that now from staff's perspective to give some feedback. It'll get passed along internally, and then we're gonna be making sure that we touch all of the departments within the city that it might have an operational impact on. And once we are comfortable, I would say we being me and the different staff are comfortable with the legislation, the purpose of the legislation, hands it over to law and give everybody in council a chance to look at it, because right now it's just too preliminary. We just wanna make sure that we're pulling the right levers for the objective of what we're trying to do, which is essentially give more public input and public exposure and proximate neighbor notice, and also another chance, for approval for substantial changes to parks. And I was told by Maisie, who chairs the Landmark Commission, that Cumberland Pool and Kane Park are both landmarks. And so that is
Cumberland Park, the entire park.
yes, and that is an interesting part of this because did not contemplate that initially. And so that's another piece we'll have to iron out as we think about this. So I think it's gonna be a process, but we've started and that's moving. And then the last thing actually I wanted to bring up, since President Kuda, you're here, is that we do have to review, and I asked Director Zampt about this today, the Community Advisory Committee CDBG funding. And so my understanding is, and it has to be approved by May as legislation, is that?
Yeah, I have to confirm with Planning or when it has to actually be approved, but the idea is, and I think there's a request to the president for that to be at the first reading on the 16th of March, even though the deadline has passed, which would then allow there to be a second reading on April 6th. And there could be a committee meeting in between. Worst case scenario, if it's just the first meeting in April and the second meeting in April. I think we're still okay. But you'll see in your inbox, there should be a request from Brian.
I did see that there was that, I unfortunately didn't have time to read it.
No, I just, that is on the description of this CDBG, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't have to do it in this committee. If we're doing it in committee of the whole, that's
Yeah,
fine.
we usually do
Yeah.
that because we, it's
It makes
usually not enough
sense.
time to bounce it around, you know.
And also, I made this argument earlier, the CAC citizen group, they've done all the hard work here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
unlike it just being a recommendation from the administration, I think the committee as well is probably the right thing to do.
Yes.
Question on timing, so the housing needs assessment, you said potentially September. That's gonna be really important for us to have that information, I think during the zoning review process. So do you anticipate that September timeline being sufficient that we'll be able to adjust or incorporate that into the zoning review?
Yeah, the September timeline is before the pen really hits the paper on the
Okay.
zoning. I mean,
For any
there'll-
recommendations that are coming out of
There'll be
that?
recommendations, but what there won't be is the fully drafted version of it.
Sure.
So I think it works well to be able to inform the zoning.
Okay,
And we're trying to have those two consultants talk to each other so that
Okay.
he's in the last minute.
and then I think Councilor Cobb, to your previous question around the housing needs assessment, I think actually the list of previous studies that was referenced in the housing needs assessment RFP would be very helpful for us to look at ahead of potentially the ADU legislation. So a number of studies have already been done, including the ADU study through the county, and then other county level or Northeast Ohio level that it's not Cleveland Heights only, but can be useful information as well.
Yeah, we can circulate.
That would be great.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah. There's a list of studies on there and those are all relevant as well.
The RFP for the housing.
I believe it was for the housing needs assessment. And in the RFP for that, it said review these studies as part of the review of the housing needs assessment. This was previous studies around housing in Cleveland.
Is that something you could circulate to us? Okay, finding it on the website might take longer than you just.
I don't know if it's on the website anymore.
Okay. Anything else? I mean, I think I told I need like a whiteboard in my house for all of the things that are happening in planning and development. But is there anything we missed or we didn't talk about that anyone has questions on while we have staff here? No? Administration? No? Okay, great. Well, that means we're right on target. So with that, we will adjourn.